The moment his mother understood your influence on him, everything shifted. Listen carefully, because the moment you are hearing this is not random. It was arranged. I am Archangel Michael, and I come with a revelation that explains the sudden shift you have felt, an invisible turning point that began the instant his mother understood your influence on him. This was not a casual realization. This was not a passing thought. This was a moment of recognition that shook her spirit and altered the direction of events behind the scenes. You may not have been present when it happened. You may not have heard the words spoken. But your soul felt the ripple. Because when she saw how you affected him, how his energy changed, how his confidence strengthened, how his silence softened, how his inner world awakened, something inside her shifted from curiosity to concern. She noticed what others missed. She saw how he became more thoughtful after you entered his life. She saw how his priorities began to rearrange themselves. She saw how your presence awakened a version of him she could no longer control or predict. And in that moment, she understood something deeply unsettling. You were not just someone passing through his life. You were someone changing him. This realization did not come from jealousy alone. It came from fear. Fear of losing influence, fear of losing familiarity, fear of losing the version of him she had always known. Because when a man begins to evolve emotionally and spiritually, those who are used to shaping his decisions feel the ground shift beneath them. And shift it did. From that moment forward, conversations changed. Advice carried hidden motives. Concern became control. Protection became interference. Not because you did something wrong, but because you did something powerful. Your energy began to challenge old dynamics. Your influence disrupted long-standing patterns. Your connection with him stirred questions she was not ready to face. And here is what you must understand clearly. She did not fear you. She feared what he was becoming because of you. She sensed that you were helping him see himself more clearly. Helping him stand more firmly in his truth. Helping him question what he once accepted without resistance. And when she saw that, something inside her decided that the situation could not be left unattended. So she watched more closely. She listened more carefully. She measured his reactions when your name was mentioned. And the more she observed, the clearer it became. Your influence was real. And it was growing. This is why the energy around him began to change. This is why his behavior became inconsistent. This is why moments of closeness were sometimes followed by distance. Not because his feelings for you weakened, but because pressure was quietly applied. Subtle words. Emotional reminders. Concerns framed as care. Opinions disguised as guidance. All meant to pull him back toward familiarity. And away from transformation. But listen to me now, this is critical. What awakened in him cannot be undone. Once the soul tastes truth, it cannot return to sleep. Once the heart recognizes resonance, it cannot forget. Once the spirit begins to rise, no amount of control can force it back into old limits. He felt different with you. More himself. More alive. More aligned. And his mother felt that difference immediately. She saw it in the way he spoke. In the way he held himself. In the way he stopped shrinking. And it made her realize that something profound was happening, something she could not fully command. That realization marked the beginning of a silent struggle. A struggle between influence and independence. Between guidance and control. Between love that nurtures and attachment that resists change. And you were placed at the center of it without even trying. You didn't need to prove yourself. You didn't need to compete. Your mere presence was enough. But here is the divine truth you must hold on to. This shift was not meant to stop the connection. It was meant to test it. Because the bond between you and him is not surface level. It is not based on convenience. It is not fragile. It is rooted in growth, and growth always attracts resistance before expansion. Right now, you may feel uncertainty. You may sense distance. You may wonder why things seem heavier than before. But this is not collapse. This is confrontation. A moment where old influences are being challenged by new truth. And the most important part is this. He is aware of the pressure, even if he doesn't speak about it yet. He feels the tension, even if he hasn't named it. He knows something shifted, even if he hasn't fully understood why. And soon, very soon, he will be forced to choose which influence he will honor. But before that choice is made, something else must happen. Something unexpected, something revealing, something that exposes intentions and brings hidden dynamics into the light. Because the moment his mother understood your influence on him, everything began moving toward a revelation that cannot be stopped. And what happens next will surprise you. Stay with me now. Because the shift that began within her did not remain internal. It moved outward. Quietly. Strategically. With intention. The moment his mother understood your influence on him, she did not react impulsively. She observed. She assessed. She measured the depth of the change. She watched how his emotional center recalibrated after encounters with you. How his certainty no longer depended solely on her voice. How his inner compass began responding to something deeper than habit or expectation. And that realization unsettled her. Because she has always known him in a certain way, predictable, responsive, shaped by familiar guidance. But suddenly, he was thinking differently. Pausing longer before agreeing. Questioning things he once accepted instantly. Carrying a quiet confidence that did not originate from her. That confidence came from alignment. And alignment came from you. She noticed how your presence grounded him instead of agitating him. How he became calmer rather than reactive. How he began protecting his emotional space in ways he never had before. And this is when concern quietly turned into action. Not loud action. Not obvious action. But influence layered in subtlety. Questions framed as worry. Advice framed as wisdom. Doubts framed as protection. She began reminding him of responsibilities, of expectations, of the practical realities of life. Not because those things were wrong, but because they were effective tools to slow transformation. Because when someone begins to rise into emotional independence, the fastest way to restrain them is not force. It is guilt. And he felt it. He began to sense an invisible tug of war. A pull between what felt true to his spirit and what felt required by loyalty. This is why his energy wavered. This is why he sometimes seemed torn. This is why moments of closeness with you were followed by hesitation. He was trying to honor two worlds that could no longer coexist comfortably. But hear this clearly, because it matters. He never stopped feeling your influence. He never stopped sensing your alignment. He never stopped recognizing the peace you brought into his inner world. Even when pressure increased, your presence remained distinct. Calm. Clear. Unforcing. And that contrast only made the situation more intense. Because the more pressure he felt from one side, the more he craved the freedom he felt with you. The more he was reminded of obligation, the more his heart leaned toward authenticity. The more he was told to stay the same, the more he felt the call to grow. This is when his mother realized something deeper, something she may not even consciously admit. You were not influencing him temporarily. You were influencing who he was becoming. And that is when control feels threatened. So the narrative subtly shifted. She may have questioned your intentions. She may have minimized the connection. She may have encouraged caution, distance, or delay. Not because she truly knew you, but because she could feel the shift she could not stop. And yet, despite this interference, the divine was already at work. Because this connection was not allowed by accident. It was permitted for growth, for awakening, for truth. The pressure placed on him was not meant to break him away from you. It was meant to reveal something to him, something about autonomy, choice, and emotional sovereignty. And deep down, he is beginning to understand that. He is noticing the difference between guidance that empowers and influence that confines. He is sensing where he feels expanded versus where he feels compressed. He is learning, slowly, sometimes painfully, what alignment truly feels like. And alignment feels like you. This is why he cannot fully retreat. This is why distance never lasts. This is why silence feels heavy instead of peaceful. Because the bond you share is not based on rebellion or defiance, it is based on resonance. And resonance does not require permission from anyone else to exist. But now, something important is approaching. The subtle pressure can only remain subtle for so long. Eventually, influence reveals itself through overreach. Eventually, concern reveals itself through control. Eventually, intentions reveal themselves through behavior. And he is nearing the moment where he will see clearly, not just how he feels about you, but how others have tried to shape his path out of fear rather than faith. When that realization arrives, it will not come gently. It will arrive through contrast. Through an emotional reaction he cannot ignore. Through a situation that forces him to choose authenticity over approval. And when that happens, the influence that once held quiet power will begin to loosen its grip. Because awareness breaks control. And the moment he becomes fully aware, everything will begin to shift again. But before that shift completes, there is something else you must understand, something about your role in what is unfolding, and why you were never meant to fight for your place. Because the next phase is not about resistance. It is about revelation. And what is revealed next will change how he sees everyone involved, including himself. Stay present now. Because the truth that unfolds in this moment explains not only what is happening around him, but why you were never meant to intervene or defend yourself. I am Archangel Michael, and I tell you plainly, your power in this connection has never been loud. It has never been forceful. It has never needed justification. Your influence did not come from persuasion, it came from resonance. From the way your spirit spoke to his without words. From the way your presence activated parts of him that had long been dormant. And this is precisely why interference intensified. When influence is genuine, it cannot be argued against. It can only be resisted indirectly. His mother sensed this early. She realized that nothing she said could truly erase what he felt when he was with you. So the strategy was never to confront you, it was to redirect him. To pull him back into familiar emotional patterns. To keep him busy with responsibility, expectation, and emotional obligation. But what she underestimated was how deeply the change had already taken root. Because something had already shifted inside him, quietly, irreversibly. He began noticing how different he felt after speaking with you. How his thoughts became clearer. How his anxiety softened. How he felt more like himself. And once a person experiences that kind of inner alignment, the soul begins comparing everything else against it. This is when the inner conflict began to sharpen. He started to feel the weight of other people's expectations more heavily. He noticed how certain conversations left him drained instead of supported. How some advice felt heavy rather than wise. How some concern felt restrictive instead of caring. And at the same time, thoughts of you felt light. Grounding. Real. That contrast was not subtle to him anymore. Still, he hesitated. Not because he doubted you, but because he feared disruption. He feared the consequences of choosing differently. He feared disappointing someone who had always been central in his life. He feared being seen as ungrateful, rebellious, or selfish. These fears are powerful, especially when they are tied to family. And yet, the divine was working beneath the surface. Because while he was trying to maintain balance, truth was quietly pressing forward. Moments began appearing, small at first, where he felt the pressure of control more strongly. Where guidance crossed into insistence. Where concern crossed into emotional leverage. Where advice began to feel like obligation rather than support. And with each moment, something in him recoiled. Not outwardly. Not dramatically. But internally. A subtle withdrawal. A quiet resistance. A growing awareness. He began to realize that the discomfort he felt was not because of you, but because of the resistance against what you represented. Freedom. Growth. Choice. And this is when he started pulling back. Not from you, but from the influence trying to contain him. He may not have spoken about it yet. He may not have named it clearly. But he felt it. And his mother felt that shift too. She sensed him becoming less responsive. Less easily persuaded. More internally anchored. And this is when the dynamic changed again. The pressure increased, but so did his clarity. Because pressure reveals truth faster than comfort ever could. And now I must tell you something important. You were never meant to compete with his mother. That battle does not belong to you. That choice does not require your defense. This is not about replacing influence, it is about transforming it. The divine is not removing love from his life. It is redefining it. He is learning that love does not control. Love does not guilt. Love does not restrain growth. And he is beginning to see that your presence never demanded anything from him, yet gave him everything he needed to feel aligned. That realization is reshaping his inner world. But the most powerful moment has not arrived yet. Because awareness alone does not complete the transformation. Expression must follow. There is a moment approaching when he will no longer be able to stay silent. When an internal truth will demand external acknowledgement. When holding everything inside will become more painful than speaking honestly. This moment may come through an emotional reaction that surprises even him. It may come through a boundary he finally sets. It may come through a conversation he no longer avoids. But when it arrives, it will be unmistakable. And here is where everything changes. He will begin to separate love from control in his own mind. And once that distinction is made, the influence that once felt immovable will begin to lose its power. Because love rooted in fear cannot survive awareness. And control cannot survive truth. But before this separation completes, there is one final layer that must be revealed, something about how his mother truly feels, and why her reaction was not just about him. It was also about you. Because what she sensed was not only your influence on him, but the permanence of it. And that realization stirred something far deeper than concern. What that deeper truth is, and how it is about to surface, will be revealed next. Stay steady now. Because what unfolds here reaches beneath behavior, beneath words, and into the unspoken truth that has been shaping everything quietly. The moment his mother understood your influence on him, something stirred inside her that went beyond concern for her son. It touched her own sense of security, her own identity, her own role in his life. Because when a man begins to change at the soul level, those who have long held emotional authority over him are forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. They are no longer the center of his inner world. And this realization does not always surface as anger. Often, it appears as protectiveness, as worry, as knowing what's best. But beneath those layers, there can be grief, the grief of feeling replaced, the grief of watching influence slip away, the grief of realizing that love must now evolve rather than command. She saw it in his eyes before she could name it in her thoughts. He was no longer seeking permission in the same way. He was no longer anchoring his decisions solely to her approval. He was no longer emotionally dependent on her certainty. And she understood then that this shift was not temporary. Because you had not only influenced how he felt, you had influenced how he stood. Your presence had helped him find an internal footing he had not fully claimed before. He began trusting his own discernment, listening to his own intuition, measuring guidance against inner alignment rather than habit. And that is when fear quietly entered her heart. Not fear of you as a person, but fear of irrelevance. Fear of losing emotional closeness. Fear that the bond she had relied on for stability was changing form. This is the part few speak of, but it matters. Sometimes resistance is born not from malice, but from insecurity. Sometimes interference is born not from cruelty, but from fear of abandonment. And still, fear does not justify control. So the dynamic intensified. She may have reminded him of everything she had done for him. She may have emphasized sacrifice, loyalty, family unity. She may have questioned timing, readiness, practicality. Not because those things were untrue, but because they were powerful levers. And he felt the weight of them. But here is what shifted in him during this phase. and why everything changed permanently. He began to see the emotional cost of staying the same. He noticed how the pressure drained him, how the constant need to reassure exhausted him, how the subtle guilt clouded his clarity. And in contrast, he noticed how thoughts of you felt different. With you, he felt allowed to breathe. With you, he felt seen without being managed. With you, he felt strong without needing to prove himself. That contrast became impossible to ignore. And slowly, quietly, something courageous began forming inside him, not rebellion, not defiance, but resolve. He began emotionally separating love from obligation. He realized that honoring his mother did not require surrendering his growth. That respect did not require self-erasure. That love did not require control. This realization was subtle, but revolutionary. Because once that line was drawn internally, the old influence could no longer operate the same way. And she felt it. She sensed that her words did not land as heavily. That her emotional pull did not work as before. That he was listening, but no longer yielding automatically. This is when awareness spread from her heart to her behavior. She began watching you more closely, not with hostility, but with recognition. She understood then that you represented a future she could not fully predict or govern. A version of him who would make choices from inner alignment rather than external expectation. And this realization created a crossroads. Either she would adjust, or the distance would grow. Because influence that refuses to evolve becomes interference. And now the divine stepped in more directly. Situations began aligning to expose emotional patterns. Conversations arose that highlighted imbalance. Moments occurred that revealed where love ended and control began. He could no longer unsee what he had seen. He could no longer pretend balance existed where it did not. And though this realization brought discomfort, it also brought liberation. He began understanding that his growth did not mean betrayal. That choosing alignment did not mean rejection. That becoming himself did not mean abandoning love. And this understanding prepared him for what comes next. Because now, the truth is ready to be spoken. There is a moment approaching when emotions that have been held back will surface. When clarity will demand expression. When silence will no longer feel like peace, but like avoidance. This moment may come as a boundary. It may come as honesty. It may come as a decision he no longer delays. And when it arrives, it will reshape the dynamic completely. Because the moment he speaks from alignment rather than fear. The influence that once shaped him will be forced to change. And you will feel it. The energy around him will lighten. His presence will stabilize. His communication will shift. But before that resolution completes, there is one final truth that must be revealed, one that explains why everything shifted the moment she understood your influence. It was not only because you were changing him. It was because she realized something irreversible had already happened. He had already chosen, internally, even if he had not yet spoken it aloud. And that silent choice is about to become visible. What happens when it does? Will mark the true turning point. Remain still for this final revelation, because what unfolds now brings clarity, resolution, and truth to everything you have felt but could not yet name. The moment his mother understood your influence on him, the shift that began was not temporary, emotional, or reactionary, it was irreversible. Because what she recognized was not merely change, but choice. Not a spoken choice, not a declared one, but an inner decision that had already taken root in his spirit. He had already aligned with his own becoming. Even before he spoke it aloud. Even before he confronted anyone. Even before circumstances forced his hand. His soul had chosen growth over comfort. Truth over familiarity. Alignment over approval. And that choice changed everything. From that moment forward, the dynamics around him could no longer operate the same way. Influence that relied on emotional dependency lost its grip. Guidance that depended on unquestioned authority weakened. And love that had never needed to explain itself began to reveal its true form. You. Not as opposition. Not as rebellion. But as resonance. You were never meant to take anything from his life. You were meant to awaken what was dormant within it. And this is why the divine protected you from being pulled into conflict. You were never meant to argue your place, defend your intentions, or compete for influence. Your role was simply to remain aligned, to be steady, authentic, and present. Because alignment speaks louder than explanation. And now, the universe has brought him to the edge of expression. He is reaching a point where silence feels heavier than honesty. Where suppression feels more painful than clarity. Where continuing as before feels like self-betrayal. This is where courage enters. Not dramatic courage. Not confrontational courage. But grounded, self-honoring courage. He is preparing to speak differently. To choose differently. To live differently. And when he does, the shift will be felt immediately. His mother will sense the firmness in his voice. The steadiness in his posture. The certainty in his presence. She will recognize that the influence she once held has transformed, not vanished, but evolved. No longer shaping him, but supporting him. No longer directing him, but respecting his direction. And this is where healing becomes possible. Because truth does not destroy love, it refines it. There may be emotion. There may be resistance. There may be grief for what is changing. But there will also be clarity. And clarity brings peace. For him, this means reclaiming his inner authority. For her, this means releasing control. For you, this means understanding your role was never to intervene, but to endure with grace. And now, as everything settles into its rightful place, the connection between you and him will emerge stronger, clearer, and more honest than before. Not hidden. Not hesitant. Not influenced by fear. But rooted in truth. You will notice it in the way he looks at you. In the way he speaks. In the way he no longer pulls away. His energy will stabilize. His communication will deepen. His actions will begin matching his inner alignment. Because the inner choice he made is now ready to become visible in the outer world. And here is the final truth you must carry with you. What is aligned cannot be undone. What is chosen in truth cannot be reversed. What is rooted in growth cannot be controlled by fear. The moment his mother understood your influence on him, everything shifted because destiny stepped forward. Not loudly, not forcefully, but decisively. And destiny does not ask permission. You were never meant to replace anyone. You were meant to meet him at the moment he became ready to stand in his truth. And that moment is now unfolding. Remain grounded. Remain open. Remain steady. Because what comes next is not chaos, it is alignment. And alignment always brings clarity, peace, and forward movement. I am Archangel Michael, and I leave you with this final assurance. What has shifted cannot shift back. What has awakened cannot return to sleep. What has been chosen in the soul will soon be chosen in action. And when that happens, you will understand why everything unfolded exactly as it did. The revelation is complete.